Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Today's story is all about breaking dress codes by following them too well. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. We must get our pictures taken? Okay. Years ago, I worked the third shift at a factory, one of those gritty, noisy places where the machines never sleep and everything smells vaguely of oil and melted rubber. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady work, and like many factories, ours had a strange little quirk that both amused and annoyed the staff: the Wall of Shame. The Wall of Shame was basically a hallway-sized bulletin board of professionally taken photos of every employee, both office and floor personnel. It had started when the plant opened and became a tradition. Every new hire would have their picture added to the wall after 1 year of employment. The office workers showed up in suits or blouses, looking polished and business professional. The floor workers, well, they always looked like they had just crawled out from under a forklift. Dirty coveralls, steel-toed boots, smudges of grease, tired eyes. Because the photos were scheduled immediately after a regular shift, floor workers never got a chance to clean up or change. It was intentional, too. It gave a not-so-subtle message about who the important people were in the building. So when I hit my 1-year mark, I was told that I and one of my coworkers, who happened to be a good drinking buddy, were scheduled to get our photos taken the next morning, right after our shift ended. I asked if we had to go. The answer was an emphatic yes. That's when a little spark of petty mischief lit up in my brain. The night before our scheduled photo shoot, I met up with my buddy at our usual dive bar. While sipping cheap beer, I casually told him to bring a button-down shirt and a tie with him to work the next morning. He raised an eyebrow. Why? I grinned and said, because it'll seriously piss off the plant manager, and we'll look great. He was in. So after our shift the next morning, we ducked into the locker room and transformed from grimy third shifters into respectable-looking office drones. My friend wore slacks and a tie. I threw on a dress shirt and blazer. We drove over to the photo studio where the professional photographer looked very confused. I thought I had 2 floor workers today, he said, peering at his schedule. I kept a straight face and replied, "Oh, we are. We just didn't know we weren't allowed to look nice for the photos." He shrugged and snapped the pictures. A month later, the fallout arrived. My buddy and I were called into the plant manager's office. The moment we stepped inside, I could feel the temperature drop. The man was fuming. He pointed at a printout of our pictures and barked, "What is this?" I played dumb, "Just trying to look nice for our photos, sir. They're going up on the wall, after all." I didn't know there were rules about how factory workers should dress, I added as innocently as possible. He turned beet red, his jaw clenched. I could see he was struggling not to yell, probably because technically we hadn't broken a single rule. Finally, he waved us off, muttering something about getting back to work, and slammed the door behind us. My buddy and I barely made it back to the break room before bursting into laughter. From that day on, our sharp-dressed photos stood out like a sore thumb on the Wall of Shame. While all the other floor workers looked like they'd just lost a wrestling match with a conveyor belt, there we were, smiling like accountants. Every time I walked past that wall, I smiled. It was a small act of rebellion, sure. But in a place where floor workers were treated like second-class citizens, it felt damn good to flip the script, even if it was just for a photo. And I swear, that picture made the whole job just a little more bearable until the day the plant finally shut down. That's a bad leader. I'd be happy you had the desire to look nice for a company photo, or the sense of humor to pull off the prank. Either way, I'd get a kick out of it. Good leaders serve their people. And our second story. HR neutered my authority over an entitled hire and immediately regretted it. This tale revolves around my time as a supervisor in a call center. An employee who didn't like me called Jamers. Jamers was a new hire, probably about 21 at the time, young kid whom you could tell grew up privileged and entitled. But hey, I didn't do the hiring, and everyone deserves a chance starting out somewhere. I just wish this guy was hired somewhere else. Now, I prided myself as being a fair guy, friendly and understanding. Jamers, however, was always the victim, and nothing was ever his fault. Customer complained on his service, not his fault. Incorrect information given, he was told the wrong information. Called off, something had come up beyond his control. On and on it went with him, nothing ever his fault. The issue with me came to a head when I had to correct him on a call he took. The information he gave was so incorrect and potentially damaging to the client, I had to call the client and give them the correct information while apologizing for the misinformation. Company policy at the time caused this to be an automatic write-up. I brought Jamers to an office, door open, mind you, to tell him he was being written up and why. At first, it started with every excuse in the book. Then it started with him asking why I was being hostile and mean. I wasn't. And why was I yelling? Again, I wasn't. And the door was left open, so there would have been multiple witnesses. He refused to sign the write-up. That's fine. It would go in his file regardless. As we were done, he marched up to HR. About a half an hour later, HR called me into their office. They asked me why I yelled and cussed at Jamers. WTF. Now, my bad for not having another soup with me when writing him up, but everyone would have heard me yelling had it happened. I'm a big guy, and my voice carries. I denied this, of course. HR told me they were throwing out this write-up since, to them, it wasn't a big issue. This act effectively neutered me, which caused a ripple effect. It was now known if I did my job, HR would just reverse anything I did. HR also told me from here on out, if Jamers had an issue or infraction, they would handle it. Okay. They had zero idea how many side conversations and other crap I had to deal with when it came to Jamers. Needed to call off? Sorry, go talk to HR. Got a complaint? I'd tell him to go to HR and I'd send them an email why. Requesting a day off to HR you went. It became a fact that HR had to deal with him once to twice a day for months. Anything even slightly minor, I sent him to HR. I know it was driving them insane as they hated to be bothered. Finally, HR asked me to have a meeting with them. They told me Jamers called off and he was going to be put on a final and they wanted me to do it. I reminded them they asked to be put in charge of him. We came to a compromise as I wanted to play nice and said we both would. Jamers was brought to the office and told he was being put on a final for attendance, but it wasn't his fault, he cried. He had to go to the doctor. HR asked for his doctor's note. He said he'd bring it tomorrow. The next day, Jamers came into HR and said, "This isn't working out. I quit." HR got a hint of what I dealt with, and the trash took itself out. I love the justice. This, unfortunately, is most companies. They coddle the incompetent and overwork the competent. And then when the competent ones complain because they're getting ridden like a show pony, then it's like, oh my God, you have an attitude problem. And our last story. They picked a parking fight with a 70-year resident. Bad move. A few years ago, a seemingly minor parking situation turned into a full-blown property war, and watching it unfold was both frustrating and, in the end, pretty satisfying. My father-in-law owns a home on a quiet street, and for decades, his property shared a gravel parking lot with the house next door. The setup was informal but understood. Most of the lot was on his land, and he had 3 parking spaces he used for himself, family, and more recently, medical visitors. The apartment building next door had 2 spaces, and for years, everyone stuck to their side without issues. That all changed when a neighboring property was sold. The new owner, a woman who'd clearly never looked closely at a plat map in her life, bought the building and immediately assumed the entire parking area was communal. No questions asked, no surveys pulled, just vibes and bad judgment. Within days, her tenants started spilling over into my father-in-law's spaces, ignoring the usual boundaries. This might have been a small inconvenience if it were just a couple of cars here and there. My father-in-law's health had taken a serious downturn. He had visiting nurses coming by multiple times a week, physical therapists, and aides who needed to get in and out quickly and safely. With the apartment tenants now routinely taking over all the available spaces, my father-in-law's caregivers often had to park down the street and walk. Not ideal when you're trying to carry medical equipment or assist an elderly patient. My husband tried to handle it the neighborly way at first, calmly, directly, and without drama, but the tenants weren't having it. One afternoon, my husband pulled into one of our spots, and a guy from next door, let's call him Renter, stormed over, visibly irritated. He got right in my husband's face and barked, "You're in my parking spot." Now, my husband isn't exactly one to be intimidated, especially not by someone standing on land his father had owned since the Eisenhower administration. He raised an eyebrow and said, "I'm on my dad's land, buddy, not yours." Renter pointed toward the back, gesturing angrily. "How do I know you're not making that up?" My husband chuckled and motioned toward the retaining wall behind the lot, a feature that had marked the division between the two properties for as long as anyone could remember. Because that retaining wall, it's been there for decades. My dad's lived here for 70 years. You've been here, what, 6 months? Renter huffed and stormed off without another word. We thought maybe that's the end of it. Of course it wasn't. A few days later, my father-in-law went out and installed modest signs marking his 3 parking spaces, just small stakes with painted numbers and a note asking others not to park there. Within 48 hours, the signs were gone, not just knocked over, ripped out of the ground and tossed to the side. That's when we realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was now a full-on turf war. Eventually, the landlord of the apartment building got dragged into the mess. Probably tired of hearing complaints from both sides, he decided to bring in a professional surveyor to settle the matter once and for all. And oh boy, did that backfire. When the survey results came in, they revealed a huge surprise. The property line was several feet inward from where the new owner had assumed it was. Not only had her tenants been parking on land that wasn't theirs, but that big retaining wall everyone used as a reference, it was built on my father-in-law's property, and not just by a little, by several feet. That discovery threw the entire situation into chaos. Suddenly, it wasn't just about parking anymore. That retaining wall was a structural addition, and it had been encroaching on private property for years. The apartment building's owner tried to argue that it was grandfathered in, but since it had been built relatively recently, long after my father-in-law purchased the home, that argument didn't hold water. Eventually, the landlord had no choice but to comply. They had to move the retaining wall back to within their true property line and formally instruct their tenants to stop using my father-in-law's spaces. It took a few months and more than one passive-aggressive neighborly exchange, but finally the gravel lot went back to being used the way it always should have been. It wasn't just a win for my father-in-law, it was a validation of decades of quiet ownership, of boundaries respected and maintained, and of not being pushed around by new people who assume they know better just because they want more space. The new landlord didn't even bother apologizing, but it didn't matter. That beautifully remeasured property line and 3 freshly marked parking spaces said everything we needed to hear. Moral of the story? If you're going to start a property line war, make sure you know exactly where the line is, or you might just end up redrawing it in front of the whole neighborhood. I love how this one slowly escalates from maybe it's just a misunderstanding to full-on, we're calling in a licensed surveyor and you're going to move your entire retaining wall. Like this went from casual entitlement to a public lesson in land ownership. And the absolute audacity of ripping up the signs? That's not cluelessness, that's calculated disrespect. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.